Okay, for this game I'm going to be taking a look at how to stop and deal with early ghost play in the TvT matchup. This build isn't super common at lower levels of play, but I've noticed some higher level players such as TLO, the little one, and Brad OK have started using it, at least occasionally. So the map is Kulas Ravine. I am the blue Terran spawning in the top right hand corner, QXC, versus TLO, spawning as the purple Terran in the top left hand corner. Going to speed it up a little bit here. The main things about the early ghost build, and when I say that, you're going to see how early I mean by the build that TLO does. The main tenets are, if you try and counter it by going straight Banshees or Banshees with Cloak, you're really playing into what the player who's making Ghost wants you to do. Ghosts do bonus damage against Banshees. With EMP, they can nullify cloaking. And a couple of Ghosts can do really well against Banshees. Makes it very hard to actually do much damage with them. Ghosts, pretty good against Marines, one-shotting them with Snipe until they have the combat shields. And also fairly decent against Marauders, but really, really terrible against tanks. So we can see TLO building the Ghost Academy right now after the third Marine, actually. Going to add second Geyser here to support the Ghosts. And so the main way to play against the early Ghost build, I'm going to pause for a moment while I explain this, is if you go straight tanks, tank Marine, they'll end up sniping all your Marines, and then the Marauders will stim in and take out the tanks. If you go straight Banshees, then the mass Ghosts deal with the Banshees pretty well. And so the idea is to use Banshees to harass because they do have more mobility than the Ghosts, and then to follow it up with a strong amount of tanks with Marines as support. So that's essentially the game plan that I'm going for here. So you can see TLO started his second barracks. The Ghost coming out around when the starport is about halfway done or so. So I start building, I'm going for a reactor barracks play here, building a number of Marines, starting to make some tanks. I did see the Ghost Academy with my scouting SCV, and so that's why I'm making tanks right away. Normally I would be building some Hellions, but Ghosts do bonus damage against Hellions, and Ghosts are not light, so the Hellions do not do bonus damage against them. So here we can see TLO moving out with this one Ghost and a couple of Marines, and the idea here is to snipe a bunch of Marines, a bunch of my Marines, and then use his own Marines to do damage. But as long as I lead with the tank here, I should be okay. So you can see the key right now is to keep the tank up in front so that it can tank some hits, but you don't want to get it isolated from your Marines. And so at this point I decide to back up. I see he's got two Ghosts, each with 75 energy, 25 mana per snipe. That takes out 6 of my Marines, leaves me with only 2 Marines and a siege tank, and I really don't want to trade down at this point. The larger the armies get, the better off I'm going to be, because I'm going siege tanks, and siege tanks tend to increase in power at a more exponential rate as you get more of them. Like 4 siege tanks or 6 siege tanks are not just twice as powerful as 2 siege tanks, they're more than that because they tend to kill more things before they get in range. Whereas units like Ghosts actually favor small encounters because snipe is fairly micro-intensive, and the Ghosts don't really have any, well, they don't have splash damage. So you can see here, I've got the tech lab on my starport. I'm starting to make Banshees, continuing to make tanks, and the other critical thing here is I'm getting a second barracks and an early tech lab. I'm not going to build Marauders. I don't think I need them. What I am going to do is rush out combat shields so that my Ghosts my Marines no longer get one-shot by the Ghosts. So I get an engineering bay here. I'm not actually sure. He could be going for Cloak, and if he were to get a cloaked Ghost or 2 in my main and start sniping, well, probably just attacking SCVs, that would be kind of bad for me. So I get an early turret here pretty soon. Just put it at my choke so I don't have to worry about this, or at least I know when the Ghost is coming in. There's a difference between seeing a Ghost enter your main here and realizing a Ghost is in your main and has already killed 3 SCVs. The damage control and the level of things you can do to mitigate the damage are a lot different. So earlier is better. Here we see I'm just kind of harassing him with the Banshee. I don't want to actually engage where his ghosts are, and so I'm never really going to stay in one spot for too long. The whole idea with this is I'm trying to force him to make more ghosts to deal with my Banshee at this point. I also want him to get him to burn EMPs, in the hope, I want him to think that I'm going Cloak, or at least not take the chance that I might be going Cloak, so he EMPs, and that's less mana that he can use to snipe my units. At the same time, I'm expanding on my own, I'm making a large number of tanks, and I'm continuing to produce Banshees. And then the key here is, before he has a chance to really get his second base to kick in, I'm going to move out with my pretty sizable number of tanks. What I don't want to have happen is let him get to a point where he's actually able to produce a number of tanks that he can hold off early pressure. Tanks very good on the defensive. 3 tanks versus 5, it can be a little difficult to push, particularly depending on how well you secure air superiority. Since I'm making Banshees here, I know my air superiority isn't going to last forever. The moment he really gets a sizable number of Vikings out, I'm going to lose it. And so part of my objective is to attack before he gets Vikings and siege tanks. And the other thing is I don't want him to realize that I'm not really committing very heavily on the Banshees and just start making a ton of Marauders with tanks. That's really the best counter to this Marine tank army. So you can see here, I really want to secure a good position right away. That's going to be really important. I want my siege tanks to be in range of this expansion, and I want to be able to continue to push in and not let him push me back. So you can see, let's go to my view. Part of the build that he's doing involves holding off this early aggression with a nuke. And so when the nuke comes, I just unsiege a couple of tanks that are in range and I move them back. The thing that you don't want to do is unsiege everything. If you unsiege everything, he stims in with the Marauders. Then things get a little bit dicey and it gets a little tougher to deal with. You can see the Marines doing pretty well against the Ghosts because they're not getting one shot. And so at this point, what I really want is to get a Banshee up on the high ground. But the main components here are you need to splash Banshees with tanks together. Just getting one or the other leaves you vulnerable to certain things, but getting both allows you to kind of work the position the way you want it to. What's particularly effective is because he's relying on Ghosts for his anti-air, if you do kill the Ghosts, your Banshees basically have free reign of his base. And the Ghosts also, you can limit their mobility using the siege tanks here. So you can see I'm making it very hard for his Ghost to get in a position where it can actually defend the tanks against the Banshee. So I bring and now the Ghost is so low that I go ahead and just kill it, and now I can go ahead and snipe the tanks. So the whole idea is, because this unit composition is extremely gas heavy, siege tank Banshee, even you can barely afford Cloak. I'm not really sure you would even want to. And so trying to make Marauders, which actually would be stronger in this case, because he's not really going much in the way of air and they're more resilient to snipe, you don't have the Ghost or the gas really to do it. So Marine tank works fine. The other thing is Marines are better against Marauders than, I mean, obviously Marauders against Marauders is even. Marines are cost effective against Marauders. And because this early Ghost opening slows down his tech so much, you know he's either going Ghosts or he's going Marauders. So you get the 2 units that counter those. Siege tanks counter Ghosts, Marines counter Marauders, and then you get Banshees to force him to make more Ghosts than he really wants to. And so he can't deal with this large amount of siege tanks. And so that is basically how you want to deal with any kind of early Ghost opening. Take advantage of the fact that they're not teching as quickly. Take advantage of the fact that they need 2 distinct units to counter siege tanks and Banshees, and then try and force them one way or another. You could bait them into making a lot of Marauders by revealing your siege tanks while hiding Banshees, and then go in and take out all their Ghosts with the Banshees and clean up. Or you could do it the other way around, kind of like I did, where I bait them into making more ghosts than they really want to, using just 1 or 2 or 3 banshees, and then my siege tank marine army is basically unstoppable. Also really critical is the early combat shield, so your marines aren't getting one shot by snipe. And then if you opt for this kind of marine tank banshee play that I'm suggesting, you want to move in before he's able to reestablish air superiority with Vikings and siege tanks. You can see I got in. If I had waited maybe a minute or 2 longer, I probably wouldn't have been able to break him, because I didn't have air superiority, I didn't have cloak, and he was starting to make both tanks and Vikings. And that is how you deal with it.